Hey everybody, Scott Dust here, Chief Research Officer at Cloverleaf. Today we're going to talk about leveraging Cloverleaf's technology platform specifically for addressing some of the challenges in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. We all know that DE&I is important in terms of fairness, but it also can be really tricky to ensure that DE&I initiatives work and that they lead to long-term performance. So first off, what exactly is Cloverleaf? It is an integrated performance development system where it offers executive coaching through automated technology. When you're on the platform, you are able to understand your own psychographics and the implications of those, as well as those of your teammates. It's not enough to know more about yourself. It's important that everybody that you work with also understands who you are and the way that you operate. And then from there, you can also begin to have a better feel for, do you have diversity in terms of the deep level characteristics, the psychographics, and ensuring that you have complementarity or supplementarity in your workforce to make sure that you're addressing problems. And so let's get into DE&I and break down how some of these Cloverleaf platform tools can apply. So first off, equity is this idea of ensuring that there is an equal chance of accessing a defined set of resources for everybody involved. Diversity is those protected classes, age, gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, ensuring that you have a diverse mix of individuals that have those characteristics. And then inclusion, a lot of times, is the missing component, where it's actually not enough to have diversity. Inclusion is about ensuring that everybody feels a sense of belonging, ensuring that they're there and that they feel accepted and that they feel like they are still part of that unit and of that team and of that mission, even though they're diverse, right? So you really don't have good use of diversity unless you also have this sense of inclusion, this sense of belongingness. So breaking down diversity is important as well, because a lot of times when we're talking about diversity, and specifically DE&I, what they're actually talking about is surface level diversity. Okay, but there's another kind, that's deep level diversity. This is our attitudes, our knowledge, skills, and backgrounds, our values, our personality, our cognitive orientations, all that good stuff. It's beneath the surface. These are these psychographics that Cloverleaf is assessing and helping manage. But here's the challenge of surface level diversity, or diversity as most people conceptualize and think about diversity. We assume that surface level diversity is related to performance. And if you read any DE&I initiative, they would essentially say something along the lines of, well, when you have diversity, you have different perspectives, and that ensures that you have greater diversity of thought. Actually, that's not always the case. The problem is that there's a moderating variable of interest called social integration. When social integration is low, surface level diversity actually leads to worse performance. When social integration is high, it does have the capacity to increase team performance and organizational performance. This social integration is speaking to this idea of inclusion. So what exactly can we do to try and facilitate social integration, or this idea of inclusion, when we do have people that are different? A few different examples for what Cloverleaf is offering. Number one, comparing thinking styles. So in this visual on the left, this is using DISC assessment, and this is myself and the CEO of Cloverleaf showing the differences on this specific profile. And you could do this for a variety of different assessments, and it's breaking down how we're similar and how we're different and why, and how we might actually want to work together. Over here, the visuals on the right, you're also getting reminders and emails on a daily basis, helping you understand who you are, reminders for what to think about and do differently, and they're also being pushed out coaching tips about yourself, as well as working with specific individuals within your team or within your group or within your organization. This is giving reminders of what you could be doing differently to ensure that you are integrating socially. It's reminding people to not focus on overgeneralizations based upon surface level characteristics, but thinking about some of those deep level characteristics that actually matter. So here's the other challenge related to surface level diversity. A lot of times we engage in what's called cognitive bias, and it's really, really hard to stop biases. Ask anybody in the DE&I space, they will tell you bias training, that's about as good as we have, but the impact of that bias training is really hard to quantify, and a lot of times people feel as if it's not working as well as it could. The problem is that cognitive bias, it's innate. We can't help overgeneralize because it's been indoctrinated over a long period of time, and we have so many social cues that force us in that direction. And this is problematic because when we have cognitive biases, it leads to what's called stereotype threat. Stereotype threat is when you assume that your overgeneralization is accurate for the majority of the people that you're working with. So for example, you might look at somebody that is Caucasian and assume that they are going to be a better presenter than somebody that is not Caucasian. Or you might look at somebody and say, oh, they look to be Asian, so perhaps they are going to be better at math and science than the Caucasian. Another overgeneralization example that's quite common is in gender. You have a male and you assume that that male is going to be very agentic and directive. And then you see somebody female and assume that they're going to be more service-oriented and communal. These are overgeneralizations, and the problem is that when we have these overgeneralizations, we assume them to be true about ourselves. And so we're engaging in ways that we think we're supposed to engage in, which might not necessarily be true and true to ourselves. So what are we doing about ensuring that we're focusing on deep level diversity and overcoming some of these cognitive biases that are innate from the surface level type of differences that we have? So giving people these reminders of everybody that's on their team, how they operate and how they're different. So being able to show profiles of all of the different individuals that you work with that are on your team or within the organization on everything from personality to culture preferences to team roles to thinking styles to different motivations, to different values. This is forcing people to pay attention to the deep level characteristics, right? It's one thing to try and mitigate the cognitive bias that we have, and that certainly is important if we can do it right. But arguably, another way to combat this is just to go straight for what we want them to be doing, which is focusing on deep level diversity so that it's always top of mind, it's always at the forefront of what we care about. Another really popular model in terms of understanding how teams operate is what's called the IPO model, the input, process, outcome model. This is used over and over again in understanding how teams operate to say we have to work backwards. What is the outcome of interest that we're really focused on? In this case, as an example, inclusion is what Cloverleaf can help facilitate. Taking a step backwards, what are the predictors of this specific outcome? We know that psychological safety can help. We know that perspective taking can help. We know that intellectual stimulation can help, right? So when people feel more safe and they feel like they can speak up, when they can admit mistakes, that is helpful for inclusion. When people feel comfortable in taking perspectives, being more empathetic and trying to understand what the other party is thinking, that's also helpful. And then finally, this idea of intellectual stimulation. We're going to engage in constructive controversy, we're going to think differently, and we're going to be devil's advocates for the sake of spurring new, interesting thought. These are all great team process predictors of inclusion, right? These are team level variables that have the ability to increase thoughts of inclusion. Working backwards from there, you can't just go straight to the process. You have to think about what exactly are the inputs that will eventuate into these appropriate team processes. The first input to think about is this idea of complementarity. What is it about me and my specific profile that could complement the profile of another individual that I'm working with? Or, taking it to another level of analysis, what is it about me and my potential contribution to this overall collection of profiles within the group that I am operating within? Being able to figure out that complementarity, appreciating each other's differences, is what helps facilitate these team processes. Also, supplementarity is this idea of finding those synergies, finding the similarities in who I am and how I operate to ensure that we can work together even better. A lot of times we don't realize that there are things that we do have in common, whether it be values, whether it be motivations, goal orientations, or whatever it might be, right? So again, working backwards, if inclusion is what we really want, because you can't have a good DE&I initiative, you can't have diversity but not inclusion. If that's the outcome variable we're really interested in, we work backwards to understand the team processes, but we don't just say this blanket, hey, you need to have psychological safety, hey, you need to engage in more perspective taking. You have to work backwards to focus on the input. And that is through the Cloverleaf platform to ensure that people are recognizing and appreciating that deep level of diversity from a complementarity and a supplementarity standpoint. That's all we have. I hope that this has been helpful. Again, this is a presentation about how the Cloverleaf technology platform can help with DE&I initiatives. The goal is to focus on inclusion and figuring out how to create situations where people can have conversations about who they really are with their team members, appreciate who their team members are and what they are really all about from a psychographic standpoint, and understanding the overall profile of how we might all fit together and work together better, because that's what really matters, not how we look, but how we act.